owning a 9, you will leave the competition behind.
Gather around, everybody. Tux just got a pre-war car from 1933, and we're really going to fudge this thing up. Cookies and cream. I said fudge. Anyways, we only have about $500 to get this car drifting once we get it back over to our garage in West Coast, and that is with this car in its current condition, which is not exactly great. The whole purpose of this video is to determine if this 80 horsepower car can drift on a tight budget. And no, we're not going to be drifting in the snow. We're going to be on the hot asphalt of California. Now, before we begin, we do need to lay down a few ground rules, with the first one being we are not considering the car's initial price. Pre-war cars date from 1930 to 1946, right through the Great Depression up to the end of World War II, and the cars lasted on average for about 7 years. They're not exactly high in demand, but they're very rare to come by, so that makes them very expensive. A good example being a 1930s Ford Model A costs on average about $19,500. I really don't think we could include this car in our budget, even if it was in far worse condition. Rule number 2, our budget must go towards anything that goes into this car. This includes parts, fixing damage, oil, pretty much anything that needs to be bought. And our final rule number 3, the car will have to be able to drift under its own power. No hills, no funny business, this car has to get sideways on its own. And with the rules established, let's take a look at why this $500 is insanely low to work with, starting with the inside of this car. It's empty. Besides all of this being entirely stripped, we have everything here that we need except for the driver's seat. Usually, these cars were designed like luxurious living rooms, with wood on the dashboards to resemble furniture, leather seats to be like couches, and also cloth on the sidewalls, which, funnily enough, were oftentimes advertised as being soundproofing and a safety feature. We, on the other hand, aren't going to be worrying about this interior. I mean, we could, but we're trying to stick to a $500 budget, so we're going to look for a driver's seat and we're going to leave the interior entirely stripped. It's a common thing to do amongst race and drift cars anyways because it makes them lighter and faster, though in our case, we need less weight above the back wheel so they easily can spin and break free. More weight above the back axle means more force on the back tires, and that gives us more grip, which is what we don't want because we have about 80 horsepower to work with, so we need these things to be as slick as possible. On the topic of engines, our vehicle is running with a 3.8 liter flathead V8, and the previous owner said that it tends to overheat when this car sits in idle. And unsurprisingly, upon looking up the prices of these engines online, I could find absolutely nothing. So if you know how people restore these old engines, then please let me know. But I don't think we're going to need one, and here's why. On old cars, cooling systems used a very basic process called natural convection. You turn on the engine, the block starts to heat up, and so does the water inside of that engine. Whenever you heat up a fluid, it starts to become less dense because it expands, and that water starts to float towards the top of the block, pushing the water that's pre-existing inside of these tubes over towards the radiator. I know this is boring for some of you, but bear with me. So the car moving forward, or a fan will pull air through this radiator, causing the water to condense and drop, and it will continue on throughout this system. And it's a very inefficient way of exchanging heat to the air, but this is the way old cars did it. The inefficiency is not why I think this car is overheating though. If you paid attention closely, we're missing the fan that goes on the front of this engine that would cause the radiator to cool off while this car is sitting in idle, and I want to leave this missing for right now because I want to see how BeamNG reacts whenever we have it completely gone. Your car and every single modern vehicle cools off the exact same way, except they use a water pump, which became popular back in the 1950s. So if you had your car without its fan, it's going to overheat while it sits in idle, and I've experienced this because I killed a vehicle that way. Rest in peace, Honda Civic, you will be missed. Lastly, the final thing our car is missing is its shocks, which we're not going to touch at the moment, but the prior owner had removed them because they said they were going to put in hydraulic shocks. But we do have the friction shocks on hand, but I kind of want to see what this thing is like on just leaf springs. So after filling up the tires, doing a basic oil change, and also buying a vintage seat, this is our final budget. Now, the vintage seat was a little unnecessary because it was $150, but I'm trying to talk the seller into selling his car so we can use that for a future Will It Drift video. Subscribe if you would like to see that, by the way. And if you like this type of video, then let me know by hitting that like button. But anyways, let's go ahead and give this car a try, even though it's not ready to drift quite yet because we still need a welded diff on the back, but we can see how this car handles, and I feel like it's not going to handle too well. So let's start up the engine here, which is by hitting a button, and it's ready to go. Now, on these older cars, typically you'd have to pull the choke to enrich the fuel, and then I have no feeling in the wheel. What is going on here? We're gonna back that one up for a second. Do we have it fixed? There we go, 12 newton meters of torque so we can see how this car really feels. And we also have some load cell pedals so we can get a good feeling for the brakes. And this car is going to, we need to have shocks in this vehicle. But anyways, as I was saying before, these cars were very finicky to start because they were very temperature sensitive. And you'd have to pull the choke to enrich the fuel. Then you'd have to pull your starter knob in hopes that the vehicle would crank the engine over. And if it didn't, you'd have to get out manually and crank it by hand. And then by the time you had your vehicle started, you could push in the choke and then you could start to pull your throttle knob and let it idle for a long period of time. But here in BeamNG, we can just push the start button, take off, and go. Now, we're gonna get a feeling for how this car handles to see if we have to have any other modifications to it, but I think, to be quite honest, if we weld up the differential and we stick those shocks on, those friction shocks, I think that's all we really need to get this thing sideways, because I can feel the back tires are trying to break free and they're trying to start sliding. Now, I am trying to keep a hold of this vehicle and not wreck it because that's not in our budget to fix this thing up. But with the tires being 5.5 inches wide and being natural rubber, they are not very sticky. Maybe we could pump them up just a little bit. Let me see here. They might be fine as is. BeamNG Traffic doing what BeamNG Traffic does best here. Oh my gosh, what happened here? Hold on. What? Okay, the traffic was supposed to be fixed in 0.34, and some of you have said it's been a lot better, but I think I have a bug on my end because it acts really, really bad. But anyways, in terms of handling though, I think with the welded diff, we can get this thing sideways. Oh, it wants to. Ooh, please don't, please don't, please don't. Oh, that was stupid of me. Okay, we're gonna take this thing back to the garage and we're gonna put the welded diff on it, and then we're gonna see how this thing handles in an open parking lot. Probably not on the highway like this. Please don't kill me, Pessima. You can go by. Thank you. After wheeling the car back to the garage, surprisingly in one piece, I welded up the differential, put on the shocks, and then also plugged up the back brakes. This means our back brakes are no longer gonna work, and I'm going to show you why. But as for our cost report, we now have $235 of $500 left, which means we're still within budget. But I really don't think there's anything we have left that we can spend this money on, so let's get this car drifting. We're in a nice and open parking lot to give this car the best shot it's got. Now, out in the center, we have a few tires set up in case we can get this thing drifting, but my hopes aren't too high because we're working with about 80 horsepower. Now, I haven't tried this out quite yet, so I don't know if it's gonna flop or if it'll actually work out quite well, but we are on 28 PSI to kind of give us a little less grip on those back tires. And the reason why I plugged up the back brakes is so we can use the throttle on the brakes at the exact same time to do a moving burnout. So we have a chance to force this car to drift if we need to. Now let's go ahead and give this a shot. I'm gonna try doing just a simple donut here. Oh, it's definitely doable. My wheel did something weird there. Okay, we're gonna do external view here so I can watch the tires. Oh, it wants to drift. It wants to drift so badly. It's begging to drift. It's difficult because there's nothing to work with. As soon as it starts spinning, it just whips out. But I'm not going to give up on it. Oh, that's a drift. That is a beautiful drift. Damn. Okay. Does it drift? Not great, and I don't know if I'd count that as a drift quite yet. So to get this thing sideways, what I'm doing is a pendulum flick along with a clutch kick, and then I'm getting on the brakes really heavily to try and force this thing to do a burnout in place. That is the reason why we've disabled the back brakes, and it's the only reason why I think this car is able to drift right now. But that being said, the car is very, very, very unpredictable because you have to work with both the throttle and the brakes at the exact same time, and it makes it really difficult to keep this thing sideways. So in terms of maintaining a drift, I am really struggling. We just damaged something. Quite obviously. Let's take a look. Aw, she's fine. Aw, she's mint. Perfectly okay. It turns out after slamming a concrete wall with your car, it's not okay, and for the rest of the time, I couldn't drift this vehicle. Oh, I'm like ripping my desk trying to pull the wheel. and get this thing sideways. Why am I tormenting myself like this? Why did I think this was a great idea? Drifting a car from 1933. I am out of my mind. Why did I think this was a great video idea? And because of BeamNG's soft body physics model, this car was even more impossible to drift than it was before, so I ultimately decided to give up on it. So had I not hit the concrete wall, do I think this 1933 car would drift? And my answer is no. There's just way too much slop in the steering and not enough power, and it makes it way too difficult to try and drift. But if you'd like to try this config out for yourself, I'll place it down in the description, and best of luck to you, and hopefully see you in the next one. Bye-bye.